Have you heard about hand expression and tried it, but gave up thinking it wasn't for you? Or you didn't get enough milk, and so although you know the benefits, you didn't keep trying because it stressed you out? Or are you a lactation supporter who has read the research about hand expression being so critical to increasing milk supply for clients in the early weeks of lactation, but don't exactly know how to teach it? I brought in powerhouse Francie Webb. She had her own empowering experience of learning to get milk out of her body with her own hands over 10 years ago, and it changed the course of her life. And it just might change yours. Keep listening to this longer than usual quick hit episode to learn all about not only hand expression, but mindset shifts that can be made to empower you to feel better about feeding your baby wherever you are in that journey. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Francie. Welcome back to the Milk Making Minutes.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I should say I'm pumped to be here. It's just the breast to be with you.
Yes, all the puns, all the lactation.
I have to say, I was meeting with a client this morning and I was trying to say to her, if you want to go balls to the wall with this, and I actually said, let's call it boobs to the wall. Do you want to go boobs to the wall with this?
Right. Way better. Way better. Okay. So I am having you back. You already told your breastfeeding stories, but I would like Francie to come back because she is my new go-to expert, really. We haven't known each other that long, but I have loved all the content that you have put out about hand expression. And anyone who wants to know how Francie came to learn about hand expression herself, it's a very personal story. So you should go back and listen to that story.
Yeah.
But you have been on this mission to empower people to have less anxiety around breastfeeding, to feel an ease in feeding their babies human milk from their bodies,
Yeah.
which is so important. And maybe one day we'll have an episode that talks all about that. But one aspect of that is having people incorporate hand expression into their lives. So I would like you to tell us your top tips about hand expression, why it's important, how people can incorporate it into their lives for our quick hit episode this week.
Great. I'm so excited. So the first thing that I want to say about hand expression is if you think that you cannot do it, welcome. We all think that we cannot do it. I remember being at a breastfeeding support group on my first maternity leave, and a woman was describing how if she needed a bottle, she would just hand express it. And I remember thinking, what is she talking about? The word that came up was preposterous. There's no way. There's no way I could even get a little, like, what is she talking about? How is that even a thing? And then I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'll squeeze a little bit in the shower. And I saw some squirts in the shower. And I'm like, that's interesting. But most of us would never consider hand expressing milk because we think, well, I'm going back to work, or maybe I'm not going back to work, like whatever it may be, whatever your work situation may be. Many people have the same mindset that I did about it, which is it looks this one way. And the one way it looks is that if I'm going to be away from my kid, I need to put my nipples on that machine. I probably need the bra that sticks it to me. And what gets the milk out outside of my baby is a pump, an electric one. Like that's the only way. And for a lot of us, what the pump sounds like is, you are not enough. You are not enough. I am proving to you that you are not enough, right? So the first thing about hand expression is you probably think you can't do it. And the second thing is you can, which those two things go very nicely together. When you're absolutely certain you cannot do something and you suddenly discover that you can, it's awesome. It's a high. You remember that. you know? And the bottom line is like hand expressing just means using your hands to get milk out of your body. And I would add in a way that doesn't hurt. That is what I would call effective hand expression. And hand expression looks different for everyone. And, it looks different for the same person in the course of one day or in the course of one hand expression session. And hand expression is something that you can do instead of pumping, instead of nursing, or in addition to pumping and or nursing, in addition to using a haka or the kindest cup or something else that passively removes milk. Like you can either add it to what you're already doing or you can replace something you're already doing with hand expression. And I get asked all the time, like, could I just not pump? Could I hand express instead? And the me in the summer, early fall of 2012 would be like, no, that's nuts. And it does not happen. That does not exist on this planet. And the me when I'm, home from that yoga retreat, watching my medical grade pump that I was paying $100 a month for collecting dust is like, no, I don't ever need to pump again. And that's pretty awesome. So I've been in both places. And so what I have found is that most people who are making, at least some people will talk about like I have a supply that's just enough, which has been my experience for a lot of the time that I've been lactating, is that I make enough for my baby. For most people who have a supply that's either like just enough or a lot, hand expression works really well and in some cases can come really easily. For people who have a low supply or are making less milk than they want to or expected to, or people who are nursing around the clock and have a baby who's constantly nursing, then we wouldn't expect a large quantity of milk to come out with hands or in any other way. Like if somebody is having low supply, we wouldn't expect a 4-ounce pump, right? And like I've worked with people who can hand express 10 ounces when they wake up in the morning. And I've worked with people who work their boobs off for 1/10 of an ounce and are so proud to feed that 1/10 of an ounce to their baby.
I think that's such an important point when it comes to all things baby feeding. Every human body is different and every baby is different.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that brings so much anxiety to feeding our babies right now is that we get put into this bell curve and our babies are all expected to be in the top 50th percent of the bell curve. And
That's
if
right.
they're not, we get told that we aren't enough for our
That's right.
babies.
Yep. So
Mhm.
we don't want to spend much time on things that aren't working. And we like to spend our time on things that work really well. And so the question is like, how can we become someone, if we choose, who can hand express with confidence and ease? Because if you can hand express with confidence and ease, then you can use it whenever you want.
Right. So before we hit record, we were talking about this fine line we walk as lactation professionals in helping people to feel like you can do this, you are able to do this, and sometimes you need individualized support because every body is different and every baby is different. So I can't just give you a generalized video and you're going to be able to do it. So knowing that you offer individualized support in helping people create a hand expression plan
Yeah.
that works for them, what are your top tips that you give to people when they are starting out trying to figure out how do I learn to hand express with
Perfect.
ease?
Yeah, great. So, if you want to get started with hand expression, do it at a time when you're relaxed. Isn't that so
Mm.
easy? You've just had a baby. You've got nothing to do all day. It's like, do it when you're relaxed. Like that's cute, right? But it's really like I always tell people if you start to hand express and you're having negative thoughts about it, walk away. The best advice I ever got when planning my wedding is this colleague of mine who'd been married, a year or so, walked up to me and she said, while you're planning your wedding, anytime it gets stressful, stop planning. That means it's time to stop for the day. And I took that advice. So I was like, I'm not going to let this be stressful. Right. And so I think about that sometimes. I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to create a negative association with something that I'm trying to use to make my life easier. So if I'm starting to hand express and I'm like, oh, this isn't working, or, oh, I don't really feel like doing this, I'm just not going to do it right then. Like, step away, walk away, and come back at a time when you're like, okay, I'm ready to dabble with this. And really think about it as I'm just going to dabble. I'm just going to play and I'm going to see what happens. So that's step one, is like, I mean, whatever, we could say a lot of things are step one, but one key ingredient is to create a neutral to positive association with it. And another thing is we tend to use, like when I teach a hand expression workshop, which I've been doing once a month for the majority of the last 6 years, which is pretty wild. I tell people the two components of hand expression are massage and compress. Massage and compress. So we massage to stimulate the milk ejection reflex or letdown if we need to. If the milk is already coming, you don't need to keep massaging. You can just express your milk, right? But we massage to stimulate the milk ejection reflex. And we also massage to learn where our milk likes to hang out. Get to know these areas. Because the areas that feel fuller, that feel more dense, that feel, sometimes a little more cottage cheesy, maybe they'll feel tender. Every now and then you might feel, a lump in them, or if there's a clogged duct, like you just feel different things. But pretty quickly, I learned where my milk liked to hang out. And what that meant is if my baby slept longer than usual and I was trying to build my freezer stash to have more for when I was going back to work, then I knew where to start. If I'm just going to sit here and express for a few minutes, I'm going to go to the areas where the milk likes to hang out. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be like, okay, well, if I just want to spend a few minutes on this, or I just want to maximize my time, then like, let me go here and massage it forward and down. But here's the thing. When I first started doing this, I thought I needed to like massage. And then once I massage for a while, then compress. No. The whole dance is massage, compress, massage, compress, massage, compress. So I might come here and be expressing like this and be like, woohoo, I got 3 streams. And then I'm like, and now I've got 1 drip. Okay. Now I'm going to massage.
This is a tip I tell people about pumping. If you're getting drips, don't just keep getting the drips.
That's right.
Like it's worth your time to turn. It's not worth your time to be staring at drips into a bottle. Either try to get it flowing again.
That's right.
Or turn it off and just come back sooner than what you would before, because you'll get more milk collected over a 24-hour period that way than staring at drips for 30 minutes. So it's the same thing with the hand expression. If you start to see the drips, then try to find where you can get the sprays.
That's right. And you can switch to the other side. You can switch hands. Like there are lots of things to do. But so the massage is really an if necessary kind of thing. But then we go back to massage throughout the process. And then by compress, I simply mean like put pressure with your hands into the breast tissue. And people are always like, how much pressure? How do I know if it's too much? If you're asking yourself, is this too much pressure? Is this too much pressure? It might be. Just consider that you might be asking yourself that question for a reason. If it hurts, as a rule, we want to let up on the pressure. Right. And there's some situations where we can't control the pain. Like if someone already has clogged ducts and mastitis, then they're going to expect, or if there's any other kind of tissue trauma. But the other big thing I want to say to you is it helps to look at the physics of hand expression. See, there are 2 different types of pressure that we're looking at when it comes to removing milk. And one of them is negative pressure. So negative pressure means creating a vacuum where there is air between the thing causing the pressure, which would be like me sucking, and the water that's in my water cup. Okay. And so the pressure, the negative pressure, the air, the vacuum seal that's created pulls the air, which then pulls the liquid. So that is the type of pressure that's happening when you've got a pump on you, or when you've got a haka on you, or you've got a well-latched baby on you. So that's negative pressure. Perfect. Positive pressure means that you're actually putting pressure into an environment in a way that forces something out of it. So when I take what I call the C shape and I go like this, There's no vacuum created by my hand. That's not possible for me to do. When I go like this, I'm forcing the liquid out of the holes. So I'm pressing into the environment in a way that it's like, well, I got to go somewhere. And then it comes out of the nipple pores, right? So a baby vacuum seals it with negative pressure when they're latched. And then when they move their tongue, they're using positive pressure. So
That
the baby uses negative and positive pressure. The pump and the haka, or this is one of my fave things, which is the kindest cup, which was designed as a hand expression vessel, but it can also be used to catch drip milk like a haka. All of these things rely on negative pressure to pull the milk out with vacuum and then air being pulled, right? And the hands are a positive pressure experience. They force it out.
Right. Which can be helpful. We just had this new American Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine protocol for mastitis. And one of the things it mentions in the protocol is that negative pressure from the pump can actually contribute to more tissue trauma,
That's right.
to more swelling
Yep.
of the mammary glands. And so when
It
you
can upset
have
the microbiome as well.
exactly. So
Yeah.
if you have mastitis or what we call plugged ducts, but is really a narrowing of the ducts, right?
Yeah.
Then if you can use hand expression to create positive pressure to get the milk out, to get the milk flowing, that is probably going to help your mastitis situation by trying to reduce that swelling, get the milk flowing without contributing negatively to the problem, without adding problem on top of problem.
Right. That is correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey listeners, it's me, Lo. As I've asked before, I have big plans for the Milk Making Minutes, and that includes inviting guests with incredible stories of feeding their babies. My top guest that I would love to invite on is Serena Williams. She's been very vocal about what it was like for her to birth her baby as a Black woman in the United States who had privilege, but who still had a very scary birthing experience. And I would love for her to come on and share her story of what it was like trying to feed her baby as a star athlete. I also have plans to have Elise Myers, TikTok sensation, who I know exclusively pumped because I have heard her talk about that on her TikTok channel. I want guests like this on the Milk Making Minutes, in addition to ordinary people trying to feed their babies in ordinary circumstances. If this is interesting to you, these guests need to know that their voices will benefit society in some way if they come on the Milk Making Minutes. The way that they will know that it is worth their time is if my listeners will rate and review the show. I see the stats. I know how many people are listening, but I need you to take the few minutes that it will take out of your day right now, pause the podcast, quickly rate and review. Thanks.
So people can hand express. So like something to look at is like, what actual movements do I do with my hands that can get my milk out is a question we can ask ourselves. And it varies for each person what works best. However, we often think it's like, I've never milked a cow. And we think it'd be something like this, right? Like slide the thumb around the nipple and the milk will come out. And maybe some leaning over, and I tend to get hunchy and maybe I'll use two hands. Like that's what we would think. And what I have found is that it works better to one, not be so hunchy, shocking. So like actually relax the shoulders, keep the joints loose and relaxed, keep them as aligned as possible. But I take my hands and make a C shape and I move it around. And you could lean at the waist. Like if someone has really large breasts, they could put a milk vessel in between their legs and lean over it from the waist and then hand express with two hands. So I tend to be a big fan of like using a C shape in order to compress, but I used to call it squeezing. My first email address when I started teaching people hand expression was squeezeyourbboobs@gmail.com. Somebody else had gomilkyourself@gmail.com. And I still wonder who that was back in the fall of 2012. But when I I stopped calling it squeezing because I'm like, that just kind of connotes stress and tension.
Right. Right.
So compressing just means like use your hands in a way that gets the milk out. And when you're doing a lot of thumb sliding, we'll be worried about repetitive stress and carpal tunnel, et cetera. So it's like, I think of using the C shape as more like I actually call it the massage. I call the C shape like this, but then I take that C shape and I go like this and I call that the open and close. And it's really more like a bounce on the breast.
Okay. Great. And then you use the areola and the nipple as kind of the central point, and you're kind of rotating your hand around there in that same C
Exactly.
shape, kind of like a pivot in basketball.
Indeed. Or
Yeah.
I think about how my dad actually always drives with his hands at 10 and 2. He really actually does. And, and on my end, I'm like, well, I'm going to start at like 6 and midnight, for example, but then I'm going to move it to wherever I move it. Now, you can also roll your thumb like a thumbprint on there. That's a great technique. And if you look up the Marmette technique, there's she's still around, an amazing lactation consultant who, trademarked or copyrighted. I always get those words mixed up, but like she created a technique, called it the Marmette technique, and it involves rolling of your thumb. Now, a lot of the tips on hand expression will say press the tissue back into the chest wall in order to like
Mhm.
get a grip on it. I've never actively done that. I'm sure I've accidentally done that a bunch of times, but like I just don't think that's necessary to get the milk out. I
Great.
think what's necessary to get the milk out is that you move your hands in a way that gets the milk out.
Right.
And
Exactly.
you get to discover what that looks like. But in general, a kind of open and close action with a C shape or a rolling of the thumb, or you could do like a slow, I call it the slide and press. Like you can slide and press slowly along an area that tends to stay full, and you'll often find that milk comes out the whole time. Or you can find an area of the breast that's really full, and you can just press it with one or more of your fingers and hold it for as long as it keeps coming.
Mhm.
So because like why would I compress this 7 times if I could just hold it and the same amount of milk would come out?
Yeah, and I want to mention, right before you give, folks an opportunity to know where they can learn more about this,
Yeah.
is one great benefit of hand expression. We often hear this idea of hind milk versus fore milk, and really all that is some milk is higher in sugar content and some milk is higher in fat content. And the reason that is because the fat globules kind of like to stick to the ducts. They don't
Yep,
get they don't get pulled out at the beginning of the feed, which is why there's that misnomer of the fore milk.
that's right.
And so, what's great about hand expression, one way to get those fat globules to come out is to massage, to kind of shake the breast, because it just gets the fat out. So, when you're hand expressing, you're doing that automatically. And for somebody who has an oversupply, sometimes people who have an oversupply, they think their babies have allergies or reflux because their babies are very fussy at the breast. They're pulling off a lot. They're wanting to feed around the clock. And one of the reasons is because they're digesting that high sugar milk really fast. And so they get hungry really fast because if there's such an abundant supply of milk, they're just getting that high sugar milk that comes at the beginning and they're not getting those fatty globules. So if
Right.
you're able to even hand express before the feed, and then allow baby to come to the breast, then the baby is able to get a little bit more of that fatty milk, and you might see some of those um, al- uh, allergy symptoms or reflux symptoms resolve if baby's able to get some of that fattier milk.
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah.
I think that, something else that's often missing from the conversation is people will be like, "Oh, well, I can hand express instead of pumping." And so people will then be trying to hand express too empty. Or like, "I'm engorged, so I heard I wasn't supposed to pump, so I've just been hand expressing as much as I possibly can."
Right.
Which
Right.
creates the exact same issue. Like
Right.
one of the nice things about hand expression is you can control when you stop and start. Like you could get
Right.
just a little bit out. But for most people who are either experiencing engorgement or maybe they're trying to manage an oversupply and kind of dial things back, or maybe there's a baby who's upset because of a forceful letdown. In a lot of cases, hand expression becomes a go to simply for softening or simply for
Yes.
getting out the first bit of very fast moving milk, as opposed to I need to, get a bunch of milk for my stash. When
Exactly.
somebody asks me, like, can I hand express instead of pumping? What I usually say to them is, Well, often I say, I don't know. I have a lot of questions about what's happening with their production and how often they'll be removing it. And, there's a lot of that. And the bottom line is most of us with practice can actually hand express instead of using an electric pump. Many people with oversupply may not prefer it because it's a lot faster to pump with oversupply than it is to sit there and hand express for a while. Many people with low supply are disappointed in the amount of milk they may see from hand expression and or pumping. But the bottom line is, for the vast majority of us, if we wanted to hand express, like just think of in an emergency, if someone did not have their pump, for most people, the only thing stopping them from hand expressing successfully would be their anxiety about it.
Mm-hmm.
Physiologically, they would be able to.
Right.
That makes sense.
It makes total sense. All right. So, Francie, somebody is now feeling like, hey, I think I should try this. What if I leave my pump at home? Or maybe
Yeah.
I want to hand express when I go to the gym instead of taking my whole pump setup. Or maybe I just want to hand express when I feel engorged. Where can they learn more about how to hand express?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So we host a workshop at Go Milk Yourself that's taught by me once a month, and we call it the Go Milk Yourself Workshop. And it is specifically on hand expression. It's where you can come to learn the basics of massage and compression. You can learn specialty techniques for certain situations, like if you tend to clog, or there's one that's producing a lot more than another. Like in general, there are special circumstances with our boobs all the time. So we look at specialty techniques that can serve you in situations where you may need them. We also talk about optimal times to hand express. And we look at different vessels to hand express into and why we may choose this vessel over that vessel. And most of all, in the workshop, people have the opportunity to get their questions answered and to try it themselves and troubleshoot live. And we tend to see that when someone attends a workshop, they have a lot more confidence around hand expression because they actually were in a group of people trying it. And nobody has to show anything except for me. But it's like the first thing we think when we see somebody else's body doing something is there's no way I could do that. We all do that. Our brains like to do that. And yet I always tell people, like, no matter what size your breasts or chests are, no matter what, no matter your supply, you will be able to get something out. And what I'm going to do is provide you with a menu of options, and you can choose from this menu to find what works best for you. Like, of the techniques that I teach, I think there are 10 or 11 techniques that I teach in every workshop. I tend to use 2 of those regularly when I need to hand express, because those are the 2 that work best for me.
Perfect. That's amazing that there are 10, 11 techniques because bodies are so different. And so people will find the ones that work for them.
Way more than that, right? And people can go to go-milkyourself.com and click on workshop and sign up for the workshop and, come have fun together.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. People also have the opportunity, if they need curated one-on-one support, they have the opportunity to come and work with me or another member of our team for a 2-week session of one-to-one support. And that includes 1 initial session and 4 follow-up sessions, plus unlimited phone and text and video support in the meantime. So, sometimes we have people who are like, I really would like to work with you directly on making this work for my circumstance. So the bottom line is we are here for the babies getting fed with freedom and ease, and we are here for everybody getting empowered with however much milk that they make. And we're here for all the questions, and we're constantly learning ourselves. And I always like to tell people, go milk yourself. And that means, go find power where you thought there was none. Go do something that you thought was impossible, because you actually can.
You can. Yeah. Yeah. We have to fight these messages that say our bodies aren't enough. We aren't enough.
That's right.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Francie.
Thank you. So much fun.
Francie Webb and I both feel passionately about making sure that you can feed your baby with ease, no matter how that turns out, whether that's fully with milk from your body, whether that turns out to be at your body or from a bottle, or whether that turns out to be with formula. We are here to support you. That's what brought us together in the first place. So if you would like Francie or myself to work with you so that you can get to an anxiety-free existence with feeding your baby, then find those links where we can support you in the show notes. If you would like to take Francie's class on hand expression, you'll see that in the show notes there as well. And if you would like to join a community of people who are discussing all the structural barriers which lead to so much stress when it comes to breastfeeding and which make feeding our babies so difficult in the first place, join my free community on Facebook, the Milk Making Minutes community group. That's the place where we scratch our heads and we think, why is this so hard? And we chip away at all those barriers which make feeding our babies so difficult and which make us think it is our fault when it isn't. Join us there. I also want to give credit where credit is due. You might notice my new custom music for my podcast. It was written and composed by Nella Ruiz, a composer who writes custom music. So if you are looking for something like that, she did a great job. You can find her at nellaruizcomposer.com. Also will be linked in my show notes.